Hello everyone and welcome back to where we sometimes talk about thrillers on Thursdays. My name is Katie and I'm very excited to be back reviewing not all of the books I've read over the past few months, but just the ones that I kind of wanted to share that I thought you all might be interested in. Normally I like to respond to comments as soon as a video goes live, but since I'm filming this on Tuesday and I fly out Wednesday to go to Germany for a few days, and then I'll be in London for a few days, so I won't probably be responding to comments for a while, but if you do want to track my journey and see where I'm at, I'm sure I'll be posting a lot of videos and photos to Instagram, which I'll have linked down below. But to make this a little bit even more fun, I'm going to be rank ordering the books from my least favorite to most favorite, but I will say up front, my lowest ranking is 3. I just have had good luck with books I've been reading lately, and there have not been a lot of duds. On the off chance you're new to my channel, I rank things on a scale of 1 to 5 creepy candles. That's not how scary something is, it's just a scale of how much I personally enjoyed it, which I thought was relevant to mention since my #1 book is not a horror novel and not creepy at all. But I do have a lot of books I want to chat about, so let's go ahead and get started. And if you have any books you think I should be reading before the year ends that you think might be a new favorite for me, please feel free to leave down below. So starting off on our last spot, although granted, I did not hate this book, it just happens to be at the bottom of this list, but that is Familiar Spirit by Lisa Tuttle. Now this is one of the paperbacks from Hell, the imprint from, I think imprint's the right word, from Valancourt Books, which I love the idea of it. They're bringing back horror novels that I believe were out of print. So this one is from 1983. Look how fun that cover is. But our protagonist in this is Sarah. She's a college student and really not feeling very happy because her boyfriend has broken up with her. And to try and make herself feel a little bit better, she moves into this little house that she's going to rent. And not surprisingly, as you can probably tell, it is haunted by a very horrible spirit. I love the idea of paperbacks from Hell, so if you've read any of them and you think I would really like any of them from this series, please let me know. I thought this book was really entertaining and it really gripped me for the first maybe 2/3, but I just never ever could connect with Sarah. She didn't feel very believable, which is not always necessary, but for this type of book, I think you're supposed to be able to relate to her a little bit, and it just emotionally, it didn't really hit me. I was never really scared. I'm just gonna go ahead and give this one 3 out of 5 creepy candles. Next up is They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. This one kind of hooked me because I saw it described as female Dexter, which I don't know why that hooked me because I've never watched Dexter. But this is told from 2 perspectives. First is Scarlett Clark, who is an exceptional English teacher, but she's even better at getting away with murder. She kills men who are essentially horrible people on campus, whether it's students or teachers. And then it's also told from the perspective of a student at the school named Carly, who is going through her freshman year and something horrible happens to one of her female friends, and she's also running from an emotionally abusive father. So this is definitely an interesting take because it's kind of a feminist serial killer story, which I thought was really interesting. I will say I really liked this. I loved the premise. It moves at a very fast pace. I will just say up front, trigger warnings for everything in this book that you could imagine based on the subject matter. It held my attention from beginning to end. It did feel a little bit more like a character study than a thriller, but I think personally, if you're someone who likes reading thrillers, I think this would be an amazing book to read on a plane or a beach read if you have a trip coming up, just something that you really want to hold your attention. It did not impact me as much as I was hoping it would. I read this one quite a few months back and it just hasn't stayed with me very much. So that's why it's not in a super high rating, but I did still really enjoy it and I do recommend it. So I will give it They Never Learn 3.5 out of 5 creepy candles. Then we have one that was a lot of fun, and that was Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. It has been a while since I read this, so I apologize. I believe this takes place in Australia or New Zealand. I feel really silly saying that because it takes place on a ski resort, and I feel like I should know which country that's more likely to happen in. But our protagonist is Ernest Cunningham, and his job I find very funny, and I think makes it a perfect narrator for this kind of book, because his job in the book is to write how-to guides for people who are writing mystery or detective novels. So he doesn't personally write books, so he always feels like a little bit of a, not scammer, but a little bit of a fraud, because he's writing tips based on Agatha Christie and other books that he's read, you know, a huge amount of mystery novels. So he writes tips on how to do that. But basically his whole family convenes at this ski resort. They get trapped, of course, given some weather, and a murder happens. So they're trapped trying to figure out what happened. This might not sound like it based on the title, but this book was hilarious. So I think that if you are in the mood for a lighthearted mystery novel with a lot of humor. Apparently, this is the first in a series. It's kind of a perfect, cozy book if you want something wintry to kind of read by the fire that will also really make you laugh and not freak you out. There are, of course, some disturbing things that happen, but overall, this is kind of a really cozy, really funny mystery. So I will give Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone 3.5 out of 5. Then we have one of the 2 books that we read as part of our Halloween Horror Discord book club, and that is A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I have read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher as well and absolutely loved that one, so I had really high hopes for this, and luckily I still really enjoyed it. Our protagonist is Sam Montgomery, and when the book opens up, her brother calls her and says, "Mom seems off." So she goes to her mom, who lives in a very cute house in North Carolina, and her mom does seem strange, and strange things seem to be happening in the house and in the neighborhood. This one I felt actually very similarly about as Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, where it was kind of cozy, very funny. All the characters were for the most part very sweet and interesting and felt really, really realistic. But at the same time, it had some really disturbing things that happened that felt very interesting and unique. My main complaint about this book is that it felt incredibly short, and I wish that it had been built out a little bit more. But at the same time, I don't know if that's a fair critique, because not every book needs to be a 400 to 500 page mammoth. So kind of in that same vein as Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, if you want something kind of cozy to read by the fire with really, really lovable characters that's also a very fast read, I do recommend this one. I prefer Nettle and Bone, I would say, a lot more, which is the reason I'm kind of giving this 3.5 out of 5 creepy candles, but I still really enjoyed it. Next is one that was a different kind of interesting read for me, and that is The Guest by Emma Cline. If Emma Cline sounds familiar, she was the author of The Girls, which was very popular, which I also read. But the plot of this one is very, very different. Our protagonist of The Guest is Alex. She's in her early 20s and very, very down on her luck. She's not a great person, which is very kind of clear throughout the book. But when the book opens up, she's living in, I believe it's Montauk or the Hamptons, one of those type places, living with a much older man. He's invited her there for a couple weeks to stay with him. She met him at a bar, and she's kind of running away from one of her clients in New York, who's a really horrible, abusive guy. So she's kind of using it as a hideout. But something happens, which I won't say because it's not that shocking or weird, but it's just kind of what propels the rest of the book forward. But most of the book is just her wandering around, again, Montauk, Long Island, Hamptons, one of those, for a few days and kind of staying with different people. So this is not a really plot-heavy book. I don't think if you're someone who's looking for a fast-paced thriller, you're necessarily going to enjoy this. It's much more so a character study. But even though not a lot is happening, I found myself, for whatever reason, really, really gripped by this. And I thought it was interesting. I feel this way about a book a little bit later on. I thought it was interesting that although Alex does a lot of horrible things and she has negative impacts on a lot of people's lives, maybe horrible is a little bit of a stretch, the author isn't trying to get you to necessarily feel sympathetic or negative towards Alex. It's coming from this really interesting neutral viewpoint, and it says a lot about wealth in the US. For some reason, I think if you liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation, I feel like you would like this as well. But again, I don't know why I enjoyed this so much more than The Girls. The Girls is about a serial killer, so that'd be much more up my alley, but I really enjoyed the prose of this. And if based on what I've said, it sounds like something you would like, I would recommend it. So I gave The Guest 4 out of 5 creepy candles. Then is a book I'd been meaning to read for years, and that is the Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This book has been staring at me for so long. I think this came out maybe in 2019 or so, and it always was at the forefront of bookstores when I walked in, and I would stare at it but didn't know what it was about, and for whatever reason didn't pick it up. And so finally I have. This is told from 2 perspectives. One is present day, and Carly is in her early 20s. She's left home and she takes up a job in Fell, New York, this kind of tiny, weird, desolate town in upstate New York. And she takes a job there because her aunt Viv went missing in Fell, New York just 20 years prior. So the book is back and forth from both of their perspectives. It's very spooky, very eerie. Fell, New York really feels like a character in and of itself. I do think, and I will admit, I found some aspects of this book a little bit slow. I don't think it should have been cut in half by any means, but I think maybe 10% could have been chopped out. Some parts started to feel a tiny bit repetitive, but I loved both characters. It had this very eerie feeling, and the book really emotionally impacted me a lot. So I definitely want to check out other books by Simone St. James. If you've read any other books by her, please let me know, because I definitely want to know which one I should check out next. But I am giving The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James 4 out of 5 creepy candles. Then we have also one that was very different for me to be reading, because it's kind of, well, it is a fantasy novel, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. This takes place at Miss West's home for wayward children, and in this world, it's very similar to our own, except doorways will very occasionally appear, and children, if they happen to come across those doorways, will walk through and get trapped there for years. They could be horrific places with lots of murder and death and monsters, or they could be really happy but weird, chaotic places like Candyland. But these children will fall through, and then eventually, sometimes they'll have, for one reason or another, come back to our world. But in some of those cases, the children really want to go back, and in other cases, they really don't because they're traumatized. So Miss West's Home for Wayward Children is a home for these mainly teenagers to go who have come back from these worlds and are really upset because those worlds now feel more like home and they really want to return. I think that this might be technically YA, but because they fall through the doorways when they're children and go through huge life experiences, and sometimes they're there for many years but then come back in their teenage bodies, it almost feels like you're hearing the perspectives of adults. So if you're not someone like me who typically reads a lot of young adult novels, I wouldn't let that steer you away from this at all. But our protagonist is Nancy, who gets sent to this school because she has returned back to our kind of Earth planet realm, and she was in the underworld with the King, Lord of the Dead, and she really wants to return, but her parents are upset that she wants to return, so she gets sent off to this school where unfortunately really horrible things start happening to the students. This was a really quick read, but it sucked me in, and apparently it's part of a much larger series, so I cannot wait to continue on with it. I don't read a lot of series as it is, or fantasy, so I'm really happy to have found one that I really enjoyed. Another piece that I thought was great, because you don't see a lot of asexual representation in books, but Nancy is asexual, which was interesting to read through. But I'm gonna go ahead and give Every Heart a Doorway 4 out of 5 creepy candles. Then we have a book that I talked about on this channel before, not when reviewing it, but just saying I was going to read it, because this is also part of our horror book club for October. But that is Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. Our protagonist is not surprisingly Mary Mudgett, and she is a middle-aged woman who just feels very invisible. She's working at a bookshop, and when our story opens, she is let go, and she gets a phone call from her Aunt Nadine, who raised her for part of her life when she was younger. She has a horrible relationship with her, hates her Aunt Nadine, but Aunt Nadine says, "Mary, I'm dying. I really want someone to come stay with me in this little strange town in the desert." And so because Mary doesn't have enough money to keep her apartment, she reluctantly agrees. This book is just, if I say words, I'm gonna get censored, so I will just say that this is insane. It's chaotic, it's gory, it's disgusting, but all kind of in the best possible way. Even when this book opens and there's a description about how a woman is dead in a bathtub and she's kind of hanging over the side, there's so much really disturbing imagery that's really going to stick with me. As you can probably guess, she learns more about herself and her background and the history of this town and the very strange people who live there. I will say up front, this book is incredibly, incredibly graphic. I don't know if I would say one of the most graphic horror novels I've ever read, but definitely one of the most graphic ones that I have read recently. It's also very long. Although it's only 400 pages, it's like a big book. I don't know if you can tell. So it's a little bit of a beast of a horror novel. But this book just felt, on the one hand, really unhinged, but on the other hand, you can tell Nat Cassidy, I've listened to some podcasts with him, and you can tell he's just a big fan of horror. This is his debut novel. You can tell that he knows horror really well. So although the book felt unhinged, it also felt really well planned as well. I've seen some people say that this book was a little bit long, but not for me. I could have stayed in this world for a while. I think that it was the perfect length. And similar to Alex from The Guest, which I talked about earlier, Mary's an interesting character because I'm going to try and not give too much away, but it doesn't feel like Nat is very judgmental of her. And even though it's written by a man and he even talks about this in the afterword, I do think it's an interesting perspective on middle-aged women. So if you want something that is a true scary horror novel, I highly, highly recommend this. And I'm giving this 5 out of 5 creepy candles. And our number one book that I've read recently could not be more different than that one that I just talked about. But this just happened to be available on Libby and I wanted an audiobook to listen to and it had really good reviews. So my number one book I've read recently is Adelaide by Genevieve Wheeler. Now this is a contemporary romance novel, which I don't read a lot of, but our protagonist is 26-year-old Adelaide Williams. She's an American living kind of her dream life in London. She's going through work, which is really stressful, and she meets Rory Hughes, who is British, and he is just, in her mind, the most charming Englishman, and she thinks the one. This book was, and I'm not giving anything away by saying this, because I know you might be thinking, oh, she's giving away the end of the book. The book starts off pretty depressing with Adelaide in a really horrible mental state where she's tried to harm herself. So trigger warning for that definitely going into this book. But I will say overall, this book devastated me. It really made me cry, but it also made me think a lot. I think that if you don't have to be a heterosexual female, I think, to enjoy this book, but I really think that I so wish that I would have read this back when I was in my teens or in my early 20s or even mid 20s. I think it would have actually helped me a lot with the perspective of the people that I was dating. So it's a little bit of a melancholy book. It's a character study, but you will fall in love with Adelaide. It's impossible not to. She's incredibly relatable and I loved the prose as well. So I gave Adelaide 5 out of 5, although it's not creepy, 5 out of 5 creepy candles. So those are all, well, not all of the books, but a lot of the books that I've read and loved recently. Again, if you want to see some of my travels, I'll have my Instagram linked down below. Please let me know if you've read any of these books and if you've read them or if you disliked them and you disagree with me. I hope you all are having a wonderful holiday and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.